On the last episode of the Keepsake box, I started racing Sharon when she and Antonio returned from Jamaica. I tend to liken our competition to an actual race. Sharon and I were competing, and Antonio was both the coach and the prize. The odds were in my favor from the very beginning. How so? Let me explain. The first factor that worked in my favor was age. I was 19 and Sharon was 26. I was younger and fresher. I had more energy and endurance, both of which were advantages in any race. Sharon obviously had a hold on Antonio, but one thing couldn't be disputed. She was older, and Antonio liked younger women. No amount of effort on her behalf could make her younger. The second factor was the fact that I was being spoon-fed the formula for success by the coach. Antonio shared all of Sharon's weaknesses with me, allowing me to avoid the same mistakes. If she didn't cook, I cooked all the time. Antonio told me that Sharon was always too tired for sex. Consequently, I was never too tired for sex. Even when I was, there was no chicanery involved. I simply did what she didn't and capitalized on where she fell short. It was a formula that was as old as time. It was the equivalent of starting a race with the understanding that your competitor has an injured knee. It allows you to strategize in a way that almost certainly ensures victory. That's what Antonio did for me. The third factor was advanced knowledge. Truthfully, Sharon wasn't even aware that she was involved in a race. That was unfortunate. Sharon leisurely strolled through her relationship with Antonio, comfortable and unassuming. She never attempted to walk any faster. She wasn't in a rush. I sprinted past Sharon on a regular basis. Her only critique was the fact that I was moving too fast, never knowing that she was actually losing the race. It's so easy to win when the other party isn't even aware that they're competing. Like I said before, it was designed for me to win. Chapter 9. Unmet Obligations, Part 1. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. After I took Sharon's place, I was everywhere with Antonio. Inevitably, I arrived at a point where I started to neglect my obligations. I was often late going to work at the gas station. Sometimes, I failed to make it in altogether. I wasn't concerned about the money as I didn't really need it. Antonio paid me to work his books, even when I didn't work. I worked at the gas station when I wanted to, and that honestly wasn't very often. Antonio consumed most of my time, so much so that I failed to meet the submission deadline to start college at a university. I finished my second year of community college with a 4.2 grade point average and unlimited options for college transfers. Yet, I spent my time keeping up with Antonio and making sure that I remained at the top of the hierarchy. I certainly never neglected that obligation. The plan was to take a semester off to get everything together. That way, I'd be all set to start in the winter. I don't have to tell you that it didn't happen that way. Life moved fast, and college moved much too slowly. Being honest, my education wasn't on the agenda at the moment. I used the missed deadline as an excuse. Truthfully, I was just busy living the life. I loved the life and all the perks that came with it. After a while, Sharon told me that she no longer needed me at the salon. She said that business had slowed down, but I knew it was deeper than that. Sharon had another assistant who stayed on after I left. I couldn't be upset with her, though. Sharon never knew if I was going to be available, and when I did show up, I usually came in late or left early, depending on what Antonio had going on. She couldn't depend on me. She and I were both aware of that fact. I was bothered that I had let Sharon down again. I know that sounds ridiculous. I was able to look at her right in her face while knowingly sharing a boyfriend with her, but that was different. Sharon wasn't aware of my relationship with Antonio. No harm, no foul. She couldn't be hurt by information to which she hadn't been exposed. But my negligence towards the job was another situation entirely. Time and time again, Sharon had been there for me and allowed me to work at the salon. At several points in time, working there was the only thing that helped me get by. But in every single situation, I had let her down for the benefit of my relationships. I honestly did suffer some guilt over that. But that was the end of my sadness over the situation. Being let go from the salon was actually a relief. I didn't need the money anymore, and it was a bit of a chore. I was only there because I thought Sharon needed me. Getting fired allowed me the opportunity to direct my attention where I most desired, spending time with Antonio. The only other drawback to leaving the salon was the fact that I wouldn't be there to do Cassidy's hair on Saturdays. Cassidy loved coming to the salon and pumping the chairs up and down. But there was an easy solution. It wasn't unusual for me to keep Cassidy at my house from time to time. I had everything that was needed, so I decided that I could just as easily fulfill my obligation to her at home. There were no fancy chairs, but Cassidy would still be able to get her hair done. Additionally, I would still be able to keep tabs on her. That was enough for me. But because things were about to change, I had to reach out to Mom and Ron, a task that I absolutely hated to complete, but I had to. I dialed the phone number to Mom and Ron's house. My only intent was to have Ron deliver Cassidy to my house, opposed to the salon. Surprisingly, it wasn't Ron who answered the phone, but Mom. I hadn't talked to Mom since I attempted to get my portion of Grandma's insurance money. By that point in time, everyone had caller ID. That feature ensured that Mom wouldn't ever answer the phone when I called. And up to that point, she never had. I was perfectly okay with that, but I wondered why she had decided to break the code on that day. Mom only issued a salutation, but there was something very strange in her tone. It was laced with sadness. Hello? I paused when I heard her voice, but decided that I would follow through with the intent of the call. I addressed her, as if we hadn't been estranged for years. Hi, Mom. I need Ron to bring Cassidy to the house tomorrow instead of bringing her to the salon. Mom paused, but I could hear the break in her voice. Londa, I gotta tell you something. I didn't know what I was about to hear, but I immediately knew that it would be devastating. I had the same feeling that I had when I found out that Mom tried to commit suicide. My eyes began to water, fully anticipating bad news. Ron's in prison, said Mom. I sat quietly for a moment, as I didn't know what was expected of me. I couldn't imagine that Mom expected me to be saddened by Ron's predicament. I assumed that she just wanted me to understand that Ron was in no position to deliver Cassidy to me. Or maybe she needed assistance in providing some sort of resources for him. Neither scenario was of any consequence to me. Mom would just be responsible for bringing Cassidy, and Ron would rot in prison. They were no-brainers for me. But just as I was about to inquire about the source of her sadness, Mom blurted out something that I hadn't ever expected to hear. I'm sorry, Londa. I'm so sorry. I was shocked and confused. Mom hadn't ever apologized for anything, and we definitely had a past that should have prompted her to do so. Even after everything that had occurred between us, a small part of my heart softened. I addressed her. Mom, are you okay? The words that Mom uttered took me by surprise and took me back to a very dark place in my life, a place that I had struggled to forget. Mom exhaled, and then she addressed me. Londa, I want to apologize for the way things happened. I was in a messed up place in my marriage and an even more messed up place in my mind. I was doing a lot of drugs, and that didn't help the situation. I suspected that Ron was crossing the line, and I failed to protect you. I didn't want to think it was true. But when I found out you were pregnant, I knew. And something broke inside of me. I was so broken. It was easy for me to blame you. I didn't want to see Ron as that person. But now I'm forced to understand exactly who he is, who he's been all along. My baby. He touched my baby. I found it hard to comprehend the words that had been spoken. Ron wasn't a good man, a fact that was evidenced by the history that Sharon and I shared with him. And even though I tried to recognize the signs with Cassidy, I wanted to believe that Ron could exercise enough restraint to avoid touching her. A large part of me was proud of Cassidy. Even with the limitation of her abilities, she had managed to stand up for herself enough to make sure that Ron paid for what he had done to all of us. As a woman with a fully functioning mind, I had found it difficult to do that. I addressed Mom in an attempt to calm her. I'm glad Cassidy told you. At least you understand who he is now. Mom didn't speak. I called her name, believing that the call had been dropped. Mom, are you there? I thought that I was shocked by the initial revelation. I couldn't have foreseen that the additions to the story would be even more troubling. Mom spoke, and I hadn't ever been able to forget her voice as she said the words. Shelonda, Cassidy didn't tell me that Ron was touching her. Mom told me that 2 days prior, she had left work early as she wasn't feeling well. Upon entering the house, she'd heard Cassidy screaming. Accustomed to Cassidy's tantrums, Mom approached her bedroom, prepared to tell her to keep it down. But when she opened the bedroom door, she found that Ron was forcibly raping Cassidy on the bed. I started seeing red as I replayed the scenario in my mind. I remembered how I felt when Ron used to rape me. That was one of the darkest times in my life, and even being so, I was 16 when things were at their worst. While I was too young to have dealt with where life had taken me, I was strong. I was of sound mind, and I was able to play the game with Ron. But Cassidy was different. Not only did Cassidy lack an understanding, but she was pure. I thought about Ron violating her, and it brought tears to my eyes. Knowing Mom, Cassidy still had cartoon sheets and curtains. How, as a grown man, do you reconcile being aroused by someone who sleeps on Powerpuff Girls sheets? It was incomprehensible. I hated Ron more than I ever thought I could hate anyone. And trust me, I had plenty of hate in my heart. How dare he take something so innocent and taint it forever? How dare he hurt her in a way that would change her entire outlook on the world? How dare he make her afraid in the one place that should have provided comfort for her? How dare he? Somehow, it felt different than when he had done it to me. I wasn't his biological child. That didn't make it okay, but you'd think that he'd feel more protective of his own flesh and blood. But then again, I couldn't forget that he had done it to Sharon as well. She was biologically related to Ron, and he still hadn't cared enough to avoid hurting her. Why did I assume that he wouldn't hurt Cassidy? Everyone failed. Sharon's mother failed her. Mom failed me. And when it came down to it, I shouldn't have ever trusted Mom to protect Cassidy. I failed her. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shenny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Thank you for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.